I'd just like to say welcome. My name's Judy Putt. I'm from the Department of Pacific Affairs. Ningada dindi daura nunawalbun yindijumarari dinin. This is our first seminar in the rebooted Department of Pacific Affairs Seminar Series, and it's a ripper. It's just fantastic. We've got such a great panel, and so many of you have signed up to witness this great presentation by the panelists on such a topical issue, the prolonged and unprecedented Samoa elections. I would ask you, please, if you have any questions, to use the Q&A button, not the chat button, but the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And once the panelists have given their presentations, I will moderate those questions and ask them of the panelists at the end. But in the interest of time, given that we have 6 panelists, I will only introduce the first speaker, Sau'ia Dr. Louise Milo, who is a history scholar and the Dean at the Faculty of Arts at the University of Samoa. So I will hand over to her.
Ia maunga aum whatalolo I whato tupu o pa ia, sam whai ngā ole ale o iei sa whamtalanga. At lo lava, ma lo soifua, ma lo le on sai. I am happy to be here in this webinar, important webinar, which brings together a group of researchers who are currently doing research projects on the current elections and research on various aspects on Samoan society. With the NUS and ANU, the elections observations in 2016, the Samoa attitudes survey that's about to complete, and there will be some current other Samoa election research coming up. But let me begin this discussion by saying that the elections process is not complete yet. Until we get that official declaration from the head of state, when the government is sworn in and that process takes place, then we can say it's complete, that part. And many other processes will follow, which will have a bearing on how many seats of the dominant parties will have in the next parliament. Now, there is a lot of emotions on the process and its outcomes. Therefore, one's view is easily misinterpreted and misunderstood, but a considered assessment of this will come in the aftermath with all the other research that's going to come up. But I would like to point out that I would like to frame this contribution using a historical frame, that of mapping historical events and contextual dynamics that has shaped the trajectory of Samoan political journey from time to time. There will be an assessment of the macro dynamics of the 2021 elections later on, in which NUS will be the leading a post-election survey, and other interested partners or Samoan academics in other institutions such as ANU and other may wish to partner with us. But all eyes are on Samoa at the moment because of many political issues that transpired over the last 6 weeks since the elections, which has brought about an excessive activity of all the 3 arms of government to resolve. Our constitution became something of a political theater, and many Samoans here at home and there abroad weighed in on the matter, from political scientists and scholars to family debates, online and face-to-face, quiet, private, heated debates on Messenger and on social media platforms. Then there are the villagers, like most of us here on island, who are very close to the epicenter of this unprecedented election predicament, which has really put our constitution to the test. And it certainly is a pivotal moment for Samoan democracy. So while others are quick to make a judgment from afar and are out of reach of the village authority and all its dynamics, one must also think about the academics and the people who, after we present to you our views, we go back to the village. E fo'i oe ilo fale, mas yoa feafe, ai o walu ilo nuu o lo o iaipu le ngā li in fai pule, ma le pou e no foai se ua sosopu. O le vāwhealoa, that relational space is very important in trying to keep the peace. The timeline, process, and dynamics of the 2021 elections has been riddled with complex issues, and it takes more than 10 minutes to unravel that. But I do highlight that the period between the 10th of April to the 24th of May, which will be finished next week, which is the 45 days before the swearing in of the next or new parliament, as per the constitution, is now a historical marker in Samoan political history for many reasons. And it seemed like it's a long, long time, but still within that period as the constitution spells out. So the Human Rights Protection Party, which has been in power for 40 years, for almost 40 years, and the opposition, the new opposition, Fa'atuatuele Tua Samoa Watasi, FAST, both won 25 seats at the election on the 9th of April. How does one see that? Well, from one perspective, it would be an achievement in itself, because we now have a more balanced House, and we are looking forward to a more robust political debate. Then the sole independent candidate moved his allegiance to FAST, and it opened up the possibility for FAST to form a government and for the party leader, Hiame Naomi Ta'afa, to become Samoa's first female prime minister, which is a milestone achievement for Samoa and Samoa gender and politics. And it connotes with what we usually say, e au lava ina lau atamaitai. Now, our politics, it has not been this interesting since the 1982 elections, in which the PSA strike against the government of the day preluded that elections. Cannot compare the two things because of the different dynamics. Then the Electoral Commission announced the 6th woman to be appointed to the parliament under the 10% female quota rule, an amendment that was made in 2013, and that MP is from HRPP. With all due respect, that particular individual is highly respected, a member of parliament, and was a contender also before the election for the Minister of Finance position. An iron lady and an academic and a finance person in all her rights. The both parties were suddenly tied in the 26 seats, which then led to the head of state to step in and call a new election. It became a gender and a mathematical debate, which can be another discussion. However, the judiciary provided the legal clarification for us earlier this week. What is most unusual and unprecedented in this Samoan setting is that it's the first time that a writ or two writs by the head of state was challenged by a political party in the Supreme Court. As you all know, the writs were revoked, and they go back to the result of the election that was declared on the 16th of April. But there are The process continues as we all await the results of another court case in which the HRPP appealed against the Supreme Court's decision 3 days ago, and I assume that will be done on Friday this week, still within this 45 days. I have just outlined a few points of the activities and some of the dynamics of the current 2021 election that makes it a significant historical event in Samoan history. The constitutional process as a historical event will shape not only what we think about our processes, and it will certainly have a bearing in the trajectory of modern Samoan democracy. Now, I would hand the floor over now to the following presenter who will talk on some of the factors that has led to this prolonged and unprecedented election on Samoa, because that's the only all the time that's available to me. But
Talofa to colleagues and friends joining us from the NUS. I'll also take the opportunity as well to acknowledge the support of the Department of Pacific Affairs. Thank you so much for facilitating this webinar. Thanks, Salah, George, for the opportunity to share some thoughts on Samoa's election. I was asked to talk on the topic of women and leadership in 5 minutes. So it is a very broad topic, but I'll do my best. I'd like specifically to focus on 3 areas. The first one is, as Sau'ia, Louise has alluded to, the acknowledging the complex political and cultural context to any analysis of women and leadership in Samoa. Then I'll look briefly at the role of the model effect in terms of PMA's rise to prime ministership, soon to be, and some thoughts on her leadership in general. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt that the 2021 Samoan election and the ongoing court challenges we are seeing indicate the complexity of politics in Samoa. We have formal parliamentary and electoral processes taking place within a complex setting underpinned by sensitive networks of family and cultural relationships. As such, formal political activities cannot be fully understood without the consideration of this broader Samoan cultural setting. So for me, on the issue of, or the topic of women and leadership in Samoa, you can't really talk about that without paying attention to that broader contextual context. And the experiences of women candidates, and specifically of PMA in the election, given those experiences, the topic of women in leadership is multidimensional. It's complex and involves experiences that attract different interpretations. So, depending on your view and your interest, interpretation of women in leadership, and particularly of PMA's leadership, are diverse. And because of that, I think that we ought to be careful not to emphasize a particular viewpoint or interpretation as better or, whatever than others. I understand that in their own ways, feminists and women activists in Samoa and across the region celebrate PMA and the Fast Party's win. But as a Samoan, as I said, I appreciate that given the complex political landscape, PMA's rise to prime ministership is not, really hasn't been a smooth process. This election has divided families, it's divided friends, and some of those wounds will take years to heal. PMA has quite a large number of women enemies who are pro-HRPP,
HRPP and strong supporters of Tuila Epa. Some of the most vicious comments and name-calling aimed at Fiame, at least on social media, came from women supporters of the HRPP. So the landscape and that kind of setting is very complex, but at the same time very interesting to analyze. From a gender perspective, one of the areas that researchers on women and leadership examine is the relationship between women's leadership and corruption. The questions of, are women leaders necessarily not corrupt or less corrupt than men leaders? Can having more women in parliament or in government help decrease the level of corruption? And we know the literature shows that there is really no positive correlation between these two factors. Across both developed and developing democracies, we can find both men and women leaders who are corrupt. For Samoa at this time, I think Fiame's embrace of democracy and respect for the rule of law are an indication of her leadership, of what her leadership is about. Indeed, she is a defender of democracy. And that is being applauded and broadly admired by many Samoans and international partners. But it is important to note that Fiame's defense of democracy is relative. It's relative to the seemingly authoritarian approaches of Tuila Epa and the HRPP government. The shift of support to Fiame and the Fast Party reflects, among other things, a backlash against Tuila Epa's overbearing political tactics. I think it is important also to note that at the moment, Fiame is the face of a number of groups, lots of interest groups, including gender equality proponents. She is carrying a load of responsibility, if I may say, responsibilities, people's hopes, wishes, and dreams, a load that none of us can fully comprehend. But she also has a strong team in the Fast Party, which is great. It is important to remember in our analysis not to isolate Fiame as an individual woman leader who sort of made it on her own. To a large extent, she is what she is now because of her party, her supporters, her families, and the country as a whole. And I think that's how she would want people to see her, that her leadership represents everyone, women, men, children, and the youth. We know that in her long career as a lawmaker, Fiame has worked hard to advocate through policies and laws on gender issues, among other things. At the moment, gender, I think, lingers in the background. She's at the moment more about restoring democracy, through which issues of inequality across gender, social, political, and cultural status can be addressed. In terms of the role model effect on younger women in general and young women leaders, I think it's massive and it's great. Just recently, I came across a post by one Samoan woman lawyer, and she said, and I quote, Fiame is a very experienced politician, articulate in both English and Samoan, a great role model of courage, intelligence, and resolve for young women. She gives hope for gender equality in status. A young woman can say, yes, I can be a leader, a prime minister like Fiame now min ta'afa, end quote. This celebratory tone echoes across the region, which is great, but I think that Fiame will continue to present her position also as being a representative for all in Samoan society. This, I know, will make her not so different to a number of other women leaders in other democracies, including Germany's Angela Merkel, and to some extent, New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern. From my own observations of Fiame's journey in recent months, before and after the election, you could see a changed Fiame, a different Fiame. Her role has evolved, her approach has evolved, certainly from the position of Deputy Prime Minister in the former ruling government to leader of a prominent political party. And we are seeing both, we are seeing a more confident, a more assertive, a more vocal and positive fiame. And as she herself has said a number of times before, that she went into politics not even thinking that she could or would become a leader, even as Deputy Prime Minister in the HRPP government. She was willing to serve in whatever position, and she was satisfied as such. She was not your typical ambitious female politician, but in her own way worked to support women's equality and leadership. She even said a few times that in all her life as a politician, she's never felt so close to her people, never felt the warmth of her Samoan people as she did during the Fast Party road shows and campaigns. She herself seemed to be shocked at how meeting people on the ground was such a powerful reality. And I learned from talking to one of Fiame's cousins that sometimes during the road shows and the campaigns, Fiame took time to be alone and reflected on the activities and was often emotional about the whole experience. Part of the evolution of Fiame's approach to politics, I think, includes her gradual adoption of La'auli's favorite term, that fast is family, Voltato Ainga. She now uses the term frequently in her speeches to Fast Party members and supporters, and the use of the Ainga term is very powerful in this particular context. It has the power to unite, to unify, and it touches the core of Samoans at home and abroad. And I think it has indeed drawn and won the support of the Samoan diaspora. That, to me, defines with many other contributing factors, including, of course, Fiame's status as a tama ainga, broadly defined as royalty, that would define Fiame's leadership going forward as Samoa's first woman prime minister. As a tama ainga, Fiame commands respect and allegiance that places her a step ahead of Tuila Epa, I think. She is the Sa'awha'apito le ainga sa le balasi, which, when genealogies are traced, cover most, if not all, the families of Samoa. I, for one, look forward to her leading the country and continuing her journey as a defender of democracy. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks very much, Asenati, for that excellent analysis of FMA and women in leadership more generally in Samoa. I'm going to continue on because this has been such a fascinating election for gender in politics, to talk about another element of it, which is, of course, the activation of Article 44(1)A of the Samoan Constitution, which is the gender quota, one of the most controversial aspects of the election. So just to give some context, do we still need a gender quota in Samoa? I would argue definitely yes. A lot of attention has been given to the huge gender milestone of Fiame, Naomi Matafa's leadership of the Fast Party. But if you look at the in terms of women candidates in the election, women only made up around 11% of the candidates contesting. This isn't surprising in Samoa because, of course, you have to be a Matai to contest, and only around 1 in 10 Matai are women. So that figure tracks, but it's still a relatively low figure. And another really important statistic is that collectively, women candidates won around 7% of votes cast. And women were less successful on average in the contested seats. So 26% of men candidates won a seat compared to 19% of women. So it's not to take away from the fact that this was a really great election for women in Samoa, with 5 women elected, with Fiame on the precipice of becoming Samoa's first woman prime minister. But it's important to note that women are still underrepresented as candidates, underrepresented as MPs, and this highlights the ongoing need for a gender quota. So on to one of the key twists in the election, which was, of course, the appointment of a 6th woman MP on the 20th of April, creating that 26-26 deadlock. So the constitutional amendment that this stems from states that women should make up at least 10% of members of the Legislative Assembly. So that's why it's often called the 10% law. But many observers had assumed that the amendment wouldn't be activated after this election because of the subsequent language in the amendment, which for the avoidance of doubt is presently 5. So 5 women MPs. Of course, this amendment was introduced when the size of Parliament was 49 rather than 51. And so that's where all of the kind of controversy came from and the competing interpretations, which were the subject of a court case, of course, which was settled on Monday in Fast's favour. So I think what the drama over the quota has demonstrated is, of course, the importance of really clear and unambiguous wording in legislation. But at the same time, it's such an unusual occurrence in Samoan politics that the addition of one seat or even the addition of multiple seats would change an election result. So this is a fairly unprecedented situation to be in. And I think it's fair to say that the drafters of this constitutional amendment couldn't have foreseen the situation in 2012 and 2013 when the amendment was being drafted. But still, in the court decision on Monday, the judges have said that this is an issue that Parliament needs to take up, to clarify this language. Of course, it would have been ironic if a generous interpretation of the gender quota was the reason that Samoa's first woman Prime Minister wasn't sworn in. But I think there's a broader danger here in how the quota debate has been perceived. The most common arguments against gender quotas in general all around the world are that they're undemocratic, that they're unfair, that they're kind of letting women in through the back door rather than the real way into politics. And those narratives are really present in Samoa in 2012 and 2013 when this quota was being introduced. Then they came up again during this current political crisis really strongly. And as I noted in the beginning, while this election has been a really good one for women, there's a long way to go. And the quota is still very much needed, I think. But also what's needed is public acceptance, if not outright support of the quota and its use. And this isn't just the case for Samoa. Throughout the Pacific, for the most part, we see even lower rates of women's representation than in Samoa. And Samoa is a real leader in this space. It led the way in adopting the quota. It was the first independent country in the Pacific to adopt a parliamentary gender quota. It's leading the way again in having Fiame as Prime Minister-elect. And hopefully this incident won't distract from that. And I know a lot of people are looking forward to a renewed agenda on gender equality when Fiame is sworn in as Prime Minister. And it'll be interesting to see where the quota fits in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerryn. So I'm currently in Auckland, and I was asked to talk about the perceptions of Samoan transnational communities in Australia and New Zealand. So I just wanted to make a caveat that my observations are based on my networks, and I don't intend to speak for all of the Samoan transnational communities in Australia and New Zealand. But in saying that, what I can say is overwhelmingly, people are very excited about the prospect of a Samoan female Prime Minister. They are also excited for change. And so this election, because of all the drama and the dynamic changes that have been occurring, and also the political theatre, people who don't really care about politics so much in Samoa are now all getting enthused. They're excited. But also one of the dangers there is that they're becoming experts through social media. And so I think this links in nicely with what Eliorah will be talking about through social media, is that it's important for Samoans living abroad to have a good understanding about the Constitution, but also the electoral process when they're making their comments. And so in talking to a lot of people, I keep getting asked this question about, so where did the sixth person come from? Where did the sixth woman come from? And so Kerryn has just given a really good overview. And at the same time, it's been quite interesting because people still are voting along family lines. And so you have communities here in New Zealand who had family members who were candidates in both for HRPP and for FAST, and so their responses have been quite measured. There have been generations of Samoans who have only known about HRPP and Toilepa, and so I think that's kind of added to the excitement, but also with younger generations, so-called the woke generation, about calling for change, about calling for gender equality. Some of, Samoans have never been to Samoa, others who haven't been there for a long time. So I think while we living abroad can have our say within our families, I also feel like we should be quite measured in what we say, and especially post on social media, because we're not there. We don't live there. We don't understand what it's like to live in Samoa on a daily basis, and also just to think about our family and friends who are still living on island, and kind of what our sentiments mean to them. So I'm very happy that Samoans abroad are getting engaged in politics, but also just the caveat that you shouldn't really be learning about Samoan civics through social media, but to kind of read the Constitution yourself, and also to try and think about those who are living in Samoa as well. So I think that's the only kind of comments I'd like to make. Kaftai lava.
Hi all, that's me. My name is Eliorah Malifa and Malola Soifua. I just wanted to acknowledge everybody on the panel and also DPA, and thank you for the opportunity. I am following on from what Dr. Roannie was talking about, just because of the effect that social media has on the way that transnational communities communicate with the election and Samoan politics, especially in this 2021 election. I will be brief, talking about the way that social media, or the role that social media has played in the 2021 Samoan election. But in being brief, I want to specifically focus on Facebook, because in the Pacific, but specifically Samoa, Facebook is king. I had a slide just of the Samoan Electoral Commission's Facebook page, but I'm not able to put it up. That's totally fine. And that was the reason why, because Facebook is so well used in the Pacific. And the way that it played out in the election was that it was used quite big in two different ways. One, as a key campaign tool in the election, but I guess also, as Roannie and some of the other panelists alluded to, as a tool to spread misinformation and abuse in the lead up to the April 9 vote. As a campaign tool, Facebook was embraced by both parties, but I would say it was embraced by FAST first. FAST really utilized Facebook as a tool. They went live at their village meetings and on their roadshow. They used Facebook as a tool to reach out and fundraise in communities, transnational communities in Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. And so therefore there was maybe a bit of comment about HRPP's timeliness in using Facebook as a tool. I think they waited till about less than a month out from April 9 to start campaigning and reaching out to people in an alternative way, so i.e. using Facebook. I guess because FAST really made a point of going out and doing those lives on Facebook, they were able to engage with not only community in more remote parts of Samoa, but they were also able to engage with transnational communities, and sort of bridge that digital divide nationally and internationally, which from what as an observer, from what I could see, really benefited their campaign, especially in Sau'ia, where the majority of Sau'ia swung towards FAST after the April 9 vote. And then in the way of abuse and misinformation, people were creating fake pages, attacking politicians and their families, sort of naming and shaming them. As Asenati mentioned, a lot of the hate on social media was aimed directly at Fiamare from other women who supported HRPP. So the week before the election, there was a media blackout, which I don't think prevented the personal social media attacks. I know that politicians were stopped from campaigning, but I think those political attacks kept going on. And as a result, the Samoan Electoral Commission teamed up with Facebook to ensure that they were able to manage misinformation on social media. I think there was, I think there was a direct line of communication between the Electoral Commission and Facebook to sort of weed out any trigger words and red flag particular posts that needed to be removed from Facebook during that time. For me, the discussion about social media and the way that it's really affected the 2021 Samoan election has been, I think that it's in a sense revolutionized the way that Samoan political parties campaign, and it is also, as a result, maybe progress democracy in Samoa by facilitating and bridging the divide between political parties and more remote communities in Samoa. And then obviously there's that ongoing or developing an ongoing interest between transnational communities and Samoan politics, and also the way that, especially for younger Samoan transnational communities, identifying the need to properly equip yourself with information about the Samoan constitution and politics. I think there was one other thing that I was going to say, just as a reflection on something that Asenati said, that FAST's key phrase is "fast as family" o tatou ainga, which has been very powerful in engaging with transnational communities online. And I think that has been very, yes, people support along family lines, and so you'll find key parts of different transnational communities support different parties, but that Fast as Family has definitely been quite a uniting banner as part of the Samoan election. I think that's all I have to say. So over to you, Salah.
Thank you very much, Eliorah. Patala fatu fasa usamal tato atunuro mfaino mai mo mai tato fasa launga lea por tato webinar. Ilunga fapena foi e mamalo le tato au fasoa o lo ua mafaio na tu watu foi disi manatu e ala li tato palo tolu wafelo maltasi. Thank you very much to our presenters on some reflections on various key aspects to the factors that led to the Samoa general elections. I have the honor to sort of wrap things up in terms of our panel, and just to give some reflection on what has it been all about. And I frame my talk around why have the Samoa elections been so important globally? Why has the media globally have taken an approach to, a strong interest in Samoa? And it was a very simple way of just Googling and what the media is saying. And that way I can sort of backtrack my thoughts and reflections, which are part of what everyone has been saying, the last 5 presenters have been saying in this webinar. So one, there's a strong interest around the news around a female prime minister, the first female prime minister from Samoa, the second for Pacific Islands, and of course, this does not include leadership within Australia and New Zealand who have attained that pivotal role. Reflections by Sau'ia as well as Asenati and Kerryn give a great background on why this is important, not only for Samoa, but for women all around the world. But what's also I'd like to also add there is that FMA's rise leadership also comes to the work of women within communities, within the public service, within the business community, who have led the way in normalizing, not only socializing, but normalizing women in leadership roles. And this is the pinnacle of Samoan leadership. And there has, and continues to be women everywhere within Samoan community. And the second aspect of why there's such a strong media interest globally and within Samoa is the legacy of 40 years. We must not forget that there has been a government that has been there with 2 generations who have lived through. They can either be seen as the leadership of the Human Rights Protection Party or the 20-year leadership of Prime Minister Tula Epasailele Malifa, who has brought through and both party and personality person have brought through a country under progressive, sustainable economic development. And this is why there's a strong media interest, is not necessarily the demise. I think the party will continue and the person will still be in politics as long as he wants to. But it's also the legacy of 40 years of the HRPP in power. And, you know, 1 year ago, the questions were around who will continue Tula Epa's legacy. Is the party, will it be sort of, will the leadership, change of leadership come within a breakdown of the party within? You know, it was about the continuing the legacy. I think very people had little indication that it will actually come back to the people for that change in power. A third point I'd like to sort of point out, what we're looking at the moment is a post-election process, the 45-day period, something that Sau'ia alluded to. You know, and we have never seen, it's unprecedented because this has not been tested in terms of, we've always had a majority. And so the transition in the 45-day period from the January election to the first day of swearing in, when the first day of Parliament is recalled in the 45-day period, it was a smooth transition with a majority. But now we have a situation with very closely tied. Now we're seeing all arms of government and all branches of the Constitution, from the judiciary to the legislature to the executive, being tested, and of course their independence. So it has been a great lesson overall for Samoan democracy, and we're seeing also for political strategy and what political parties, both FAST and HRPP or leaderships, can throw in within this 45-day period, which is now slowly coming to an end. And yet, you know, even to this very hour, we're still waiting on another Supreme Court ruling, as well as, you know, the announcement of a writ from the head of state. So there's still 4 or 5 days to go, and many things can happen within this 45-day period before it comes to an end. Fourth, it's also important that the election process started way before 9th. It started in February when there was a call to go to elections, as well as campaigning. And I think that's the other fascination why, not only to media, but academics, is what happened before this general election. One of that is the rise of new political parties. We see this in FAST, and in the type of momentum they've established, from a party of one man as back as far as May to others who descend from within the main HRPP joining them, to the eventual leadership participation of Fiamena. We see not only an interest on new political parties, but the speed of which a political party. And then, of course, our speakers have spoken about transnational and the participation of diaspora communities in the political process. It's important that we take into account that at the end of the day, the strength of family in Samoa and all of the political process in Samoa. You know, COVID has allowed families overseas and within Samoa, in the villages, and with families in Apia area, all facets of Samoan communities, or all different in all different spaces, are communicating online. And before FAST, there were family conversations online to find out who that candidate is. And of course, given their support for FAST and or given their support for HRPP. So there is, continues to be the strength of the family units conversing, arguing online before joining political parties. And this is an idea that's starting to go through from this type of research we're thinking about, is this idea of a subtle revolution, not instead of change in systems, but actually changing in type of the way and roles of which people can participate in political participation. And so to end, this is not the end. Elections continue, we wait to see what happens next. But the questions then come to the fold is the maintenance of political power, or the sustainability. We still have the 28 Supreme Court cases that need to be heard, and they will go on for another month. And so whether or not, if Fiame is sworn in next week, can she continue to hold on power with the numbers, or would it be short-lived in terms of HRPP gaining extra votes? And then we have to then look into, which has been happening, is the idea of transition of power. We still have a public service that has been there for 40 years, who have been accustomed to one party or one system, and the change and what will come with the change, if there is a change, is something that will continue to, where academics as well as media as well, the rest of Samoa society, whether in Samoa or overseas, will continue to follow very closely. So in terms of momentum, this will not go away in terms of interest in Samoa. I think there will be continuously interest as to this not only selection of power, how people vote for power, but also the sustainability and the transition of power. And all comes through what has been seen as a prolonged and unprecedented Samoa general elections. After.
Thank you, George, and thank you to all the other panel members. That was really fantastic. I'll read out the questions that we've got. We've got about just under 10 minutes left, which should be sufficient time. The first question I'll paraphrase. I think it is really for Kerryn. Are you ready, Kerryn? It says that surely it should be mentioned that there was some disagreement among the judges about the application of the Samoan gender quota. And the rest of the question really outlines what the majority verdict was and then what in a minority verdict Justice Nelson said. Did you want to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately, there wasn't time in my 5-minute presentation to fully analyse the court judgment on Monday, which was pretty long. I think it was about 22 pages. But yes, it's an important point. 2 of the judges sided with the number 5 interpretation of the quota legislation. One judge argued that the correct interpretation was 6, and I think that highlights a point I made already, which is that this legislation has ambiguous wording. It can be interpreted in 2 separate ways, and so that's something that the next parliament, whoever it's led by, needs to consider really quickly.
Thank you. The next question, I think anyone on the panel can contribute to really, or answer, I should say. And that question is, what were the key policy issues and differences in the election? George, did you want to start? Maybe.
I'm happy to kickstart this. In terms of the policy differences, they went very much. If you look at the 2 manifestos that the 2 parties have, they very much support progressive, sustainable development. One of the policy areas which FAST stood on were on the free land, the free laws that were passed, and how there was no consultation that took place, a thorough consultation that took place across government. But it did not identify the types of changes they would try and suggest once they're going into government. Now, with such a closely tied parliament going through the next 5 years, it may be unlikely if there are any changes to these laws that can be made through Parliament, because if there is a HRPP party within governments, it may choose to be a very vicious opposition and stop any form of legislation. Or it may be, be supportive in terms of what these legislation will be. But back to the question on policies, there are some certain policies that have been sort of announced within the manifesto of FAST that we can see as something new. One of this is the idea around community development, funds that will go to constituencies to build projects in districts. this can be seen as something of decentralizing, because what has happened in the last 40 years is the centralization of power within Apia, in terms of, you see it in the health system, you see it in the education system. But I think if this is something that FAST will bring in, is this idea of decentralization of services. And again, we only would know this once the party's sworn in. One of the questions that keeps popping up is the idea around foreign policy. Now, Samoa's foreign policy has very much been part of sort of proactiveness and the leadership that Tula Epa has brought about. And the question that has been asked a lot is on China. Now, this is yet to be known. What can be what we can say for now is there is support within. There's a voice within FAST that says it's not happy with the Chinese funded infrastructure projects in Waiusu. But whether or not they will enact sort of to break away from that loan or any other further Chinese support, that has yet to be known until they come in. But there has been inklings of, reassessing some of these projects which are under the Chinese government. I'll hand over to others if they want to comment on policy.
Sau'ia, Louise, did you want to say anything?
The policy, but in the way the policies were communicated to the everyday Samoan, it made people nervous. The development, although it was good from a government perspective, it really sort of made the villagers and the voters nervous, because it was affecting the core of their culture, and that is the Samoa. And those things are very dear. But I think the way it was communicated, the way it was sold, requires a lot of assessment as well in that strategy, because if voters understand, they will remain with you. If voters do not understand, they will let you know on the day. But it comes down to how it impacts on the Samoa. Moreover, there were other, apart from there were too many changes leading up to the election that was causing a lot of confusion, and the way the dissolution of parliament was postponed, the pre-polling, the general election itself, all these things. There's no one particular policy. It's a combination of a whole lot of complex things that we need to understand, not just one. There's the foreign policy also, as George has talked about. But at the end of the day, you have foreign policy, but the Samoa and what is the land and the culture and the titles, those are the things that make Samoans. Those were not explained properly, and of the impact of that not explained to the everyday person. Because when they had the roadshow to sell those bills to inform the public, really, it wasn't really, it was only a couple of people, decision makers, yes, but the people also who run the economies of the families were not there at the time. So it did not work in the HRPP's favor.
Okay, thank you very much. We are nearly at 12 o'clock now. I think we'll just extend the session by five more minutes and quickly ask 3 more questions. So I do apologise to anyone whose questions don't get asked, and I'll just ask them fairly quickly, and if we could have fairly short answers. So one of them is, under a FAST government, are we expecting large-scale constitutional change to prevent this election result complexity from occurring again, or even to include diaspora voting? Would someone like to answer that? I mean, Roannie might have been a good person to answer it, but unfortunately she's had to go. I mean, it was really fantastic. She could even be involved, actually. I forgot to mention how grateful we should be that she found the time to participate. Who would like to answer that question?
I'll start.
Okay.
You need 2/3 majority to pass any legislation. So yes, you would. Right now, it's a very even house. You need to call on the skills of political managers and the strategists to work out a way on how to negotiate these sorts of things. But it won't be easy anymore, because you will have, if HRPP becomes the opposition, of course, George talks about that. I must say they will be a very, very good opposition. Good in the way that they do know the policies themselves, because they created it. And let's see that opposition defend the policies and the development that they made when they are in power. In time, if time permits, it will be the other way around. But just to start off, it needs 2/3 majority to pass any laws. If we're going to repeat the 1982 saga, that we don't know. But judiciary is there, and they will do their duty.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. What is the chances of government changing hands several times in the next year as the court petitions and any by-elections change the numbers in Parliament? It really follows on from what you were just saying, Sau'ia, Louise. Could a repeat of 1982 happen? George, you alluded to this in what you were saying about the future.
I'm happy to hand this over to Asenati and Eliorah or Louise to answer this.
I think that one speaks very much to the unknown. The results of the court petitions and all that, possible by-elections could change again numbers in Parliament, and there is a possibility of the repeat of 1982 saga, but we'll just have to wait and see, I think, how things unfold in the next few weeks or months.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll just ask one last question, and maybe you, Asenati and Eliorah, might like to answer this one. There's a widely shared phenomenon which states or believes, I guess, that there's no inequality, gender inequality in Samoa. Do you therefore think that the quota system is relevant to the Samoan context because of this belief? Kerryn, you can answer as well.
I'm going to pass it to Asenati.
I think the context, two different contexts to those. There might be some link overlap. The point about there's no inequality in Samoa, I think that might allude to the sort of whengainga brother-sister sort of thing, concept that you have that equality thing within your family context. But the quota system, really is a mechanism to ensure that there is equal opportunity given to both, especially to women. And given the fact that, women have always been there's always been a lower number of women in Parliament. So it's a mechanism that could support or complement, if you like, the whengainga brother-sister whengainga in the cultural context. But yeah, I think there might be links, there might be contradictions as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Kerryn, you might like to.
Eliorah? Did you want to say anything? No? Okay, it's 12:05 now. If any of the panelists would like to have say anything before we go. Any final comments?
I would just to say I'd like to invite Sau'ia to conclude, because to have a panel from Samoa join us, as well as Roannie from Auckland join us, it's been an absolute pleasure. But Sau'ia, if you could say a final words to conclude our panel, we'd be most grateful. But thank you everyone for participating.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for giving me the rights to conclude our panel. It's been a wonderful discussion with everyone, different tropes and their own vantage point coming from where your speciality area is. But for the audience who are listening in, e whakataiatu ia le I lau whawhongaanga poi, whamalulu atu poi pāpai ua iai ia ni la whonga poi ua whamanua lia ina ai o tau tina ngalo, ia e matua atu ina. Ai o le whaasoa lea, ia lea lava e alan mafua o na sai. Ai pei poi o na saunoa poi ia le o lo tu le foi taimi nei, ia whaapea foi le taitai foi o le pāti ua whaamanueina i le whaamasinonga ia toa le tai e mawapea le file mu. Ia o la uwhaatai lea e mamoli atu ai I ia o tō wawhionga. Thank you very much, ANU, for the Department of Pacific Affairs for having me on this panel. It's been great, good discussion, and it has been an eye-opener for some of us as well. And the sharing is really good, especially when we're dealing with an event that is not yet finished and it continues to unfolds itself. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's tempting actually to ask you all to come back in a few weeks' time to discuss further. We could make it an ongoing series, but it's lovely to have had an international collaboration like this, as George said. We're really grateful. And I would encourage all the participants to look at the Department of Pacific Affairs Seminar Series schedule to see what other fantastic things, I keep on using that word, fabulous, fantastic, wonderful events or seminars, I should say, that we're having in the future. But we are really, truly grateful. Thank you so much. It's been a great start to the seminar series. Thank you.